All right, so as you may know, if you've been watching the rest of the playlist or just keeping track of the league, we had our fourth Cubevitational last weekend. And today we're going to be having a bit of a chat with Matt, the champion of Cubevitational 4, just kind of talking through his thoughts on the four drafts that we played, anything that stood out in his matches, or really just a report on the Cubevitational as a whole. So sit back, relax, take a listen to Matt talking us through his drafts, the decks he played, and his thoughts on the day as a whole. Yeah, so I guess we can start with the rotisserie stuff if you just want to talk about you were the number 2 seed. You get to pick your spot. I don't think it's like a hugely controversial opinion. Joey had picked the 8th pick slot. I don't think it was super controversial.
Yeah, I finished second in the fit placement rankings, although I had most points at large. So Joey had first pick. I talked to him after the draft, and he was deciding between first and 8th. Although he mentioned that might not be the best strategy in general. At least his thoughts. There are some arguments for like second, or 7th or something. But he chose 8th because he was planning on building, I think, around Basim ibn Ishaq, I think is how you pronounce it. I'm not exactly sure. So he wanted the double mocks. And that left first for me. And in hindsight, I still don't know if my first pick is optimal. We haven't played a ton with Gleemox, so I don't know how it actually ranks power wise. And I figured my plan going in was to try and draft Boros because I think it's the best archetype in the cube, and try and strong arm anyone that was trying to fight me on it out of the archetype. And I figured if I'm going into that, it really only leaves me with like 2 options realistically, which are Gleemox or Black Lotus, and distant third of Mana Crypt. And I decided to err on the side of Gleemox. I once again don't know if that's the correct pick, but that's where I landed on because I wanted to see.
I like that choice for the strategy you're describing because it's easy to see somebody taking Lotus and just trying to do like broken combo-y things and staying away from your red and white cards that you are looking for.
Yeah, I think it was like definitely a reasonable choice, at least. I don't know again if it was correct. I mean, there's no way to know if it's correct, but I think it definitely enables like a lot better strategies for other players too. Like giving them Black Lotus as well, like giving Pellman Black Lotus in particular when I had the opportunity to take it versus giving him Gleemox is like there's some trade-off there too that's worth thinking about. But I do agree that like it's at least a reasonable decision.
Yeah, and I generally, we've talked about this a little bit before, and like you said, it's hard to know like definitively, but I generally do think that first or 8th is the optimal spots to be. For me, the main difference is that if you know what you want to do for sure, that being first is better. But if you are unsure, then I think being 8th is better because you kind of get to see the draft like form before you have to make real picks. Because normally, I mean, especially in this cube, because we've added Gleemox and Jack in the Mox, which brings us up to 12 essentially like power cards. So much of the first 2 rounds is just going to be power, so like you don't really get the chance to like cement, I guess, your archetype or whatever, which is why I think being in the front half of the draft is, while you only get one piece of like pure power, you get first dibs essentially on the like archetype defining cards.
Yeah, not even cementing what your strategy is, but you don't even really get to like pick a strategy yet. You're just taking a piece of power, so you don't even get to signal what you're trying to do either.
You do get a little bit of the like signaling in like what color Moxen you take. Like Spurlock specifically took Pearl Ruby to try and signal that he's going to go into Boros, but he got scared off of it quickly. And Joey, like I said, took Blue Black, which isn't as much a signal because they are just the best Moxes, but was also trying to signal. But the other thing that I wanted to mention about the early picks was of, like Scott mentioned, the back half of the second round were picking like the top of the non-power cards. And Daniel specifically took Broadside, which I immediately thought about because I wanted at that point he was signaling he was going to red. I wanted to try and signal that I'm going to take white cards and hope that pushes him to like red green or mono red or something not white. So originally I was planning there to take a Johnny and some other powerful mono white card, but I remembered that the One Ring existed and I don't really want to pass that. Plus it's like a good top end in Boros. So I took that there and took what I felt was the best white card, which was a Johnny. It did not seem to work forcing him out of white, but we sort of settled into this dynamic of he takes the bigger stuff, I take the smaller stuff, which worked out for him in the mirror, and to some extent worked out to me in the rest of the matches, because I think the smaller version is better in general, but he was the only other person who decided to try and fight me on Boros, even though Spurlock mentioned that he was going to go into Boros. He took that early Swords to Plowshares, but then sort of assessed and saw that like Daniel and I are not going to like just make it easy on him. So he quickly abandoned ship.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned nobody's really fighting with Boros outside of, obviously, I'm sure there's a lot of cards in Daniel's picks here that you would have loved to have. Was there anywhere else in the draft that somebody like took something that you were expecting to just like fall into your lap essentially, or anything that kind of like threw you off a game in the middle?
Let me see. I don't think so, because there wasn't anyone else in our colors for the most part. So it would have been like a colorless thing, or I was surprised that Swords got taken that early. Not that it's not a great card. I just wasn't thinking about it. I didn't notice that he even took it. I was mainly focusing on Daniel at this point. But for the most part, the only person who was really taking cards that were in our colors really was Daniel.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just looking. I don't really see a ton.
I didn't necessarily think there was anything. I just, you never really know. People have their
for sure.
People have their plans, and
I do want to mention something that I wanted to try in this draft, which did not pan out. Was I wanted to try, since I ended up with Chrome Mox and Gleemox as well as the City of Traders, I wanted to try Sage of the Skies and see if I couldn't do like turn 1 or 2 copied Sage of the Skies. It did not happen at any point in the draft, and I boarded out 2 of the 3 matches, but it was something that I wanted to try, and I think I got a little unlucky in that it never happened, but at the same time, I only had a total of 5 out of my like potential 9 matches that I had it in my deck anyway.
Yeah, it kind of feels like, looking at the whole deck here, that Corey Steelcutter is obviously not the same exact thing, but Corey Steelcutter is kind of like a better version of that same sort of like plan or play or whatever.
It's better in general and going longer in the game, but Steelcutter is better later. The plan for Sage is to play it on turn 1 or 2, and it'd be a better early play.
Way better there for sure.
But yeah, I agree. Steelcutter was for sure way better, a better, like in general, a better version of Sage of the Skies. But Sage of the Skies in particular was just a enticing early aggressive, like early turn play that I wanted to try.
Right. And yeah, not a card that's in the normal Magic Online queue, but I believe Spurlock added that one kind of recently with a 3-0, so it was good to see it get picked. I guess not as good to see it not get any play really, but
speaking of not getting play, this is getting a little bit into the matches.
Yeah, I mean, feel free. Anything
funnily enough,
you want to talk about in this draft?
One of the weakest elements of my deck felt like it was Stoneforge Mystic, not because the card was bad, because it was very key in my matchup against Scott, but I just drew Cauldra a million times and it was terrible every time. And it felt more detrimental than beneficial 90% of the time because I just had this bad artifact stuck in my deck that if I don't have this 2-drop live is just going to be terrible. I did get into play once. I think I was close to hard casting in another game with City of Traders, but it just in general did not feel very good. Also to note, I think Clarion Conquer probably should have started in my sideboard. I main decked it because again, it felt like another thing like Sage of the Skies to just play early off City of Traders and be interactive. But I don't know if it was just the way the matchups broke or how the field was in general, but I feel like I hurt myself more than my opponents most of the time.
Yeah, I was gonna say that there's definitely decks that card just are just blanks, but you have a lot of stuff that it kind of coincidentally hits.
Yeah, the main thing was the Moxen. The downside to playing Clarion Conquer earlier and having that be a plan is that immediately turns off my ability to use the things that I used to cast the Clarion Conqueror early. And if 2 of my mana sources in my deck are in my 16 land deck are going to get turned off by this card, like casting it early will often just result in me not casting spells for a while. And that did happen in one of our games. I think it was against you pros that happened.
That sounds familiar, yeah.
To get into the matches, I played against pros who was on Nadu, and I think my deck was very well suited for that matchup. I have like Caracas and a bunch of removal spells plus just efficient threats. Kind of hard to stick your combo when I just have a ton of interaction while also just like presenting threats of my own. And then I played against Daniel, who, like I mentioned, we played the mirror. And as I mentioned in the going over the roto part, I think he is favored in the mirror. Typically in your aggro / mid-range matchups, the player that is slightly larger than the other person is favored. And Daniel, we drafted very similar decks, but Daniel's was the bigger version of mine. So in a head-to-head, it just like we got to top deck wars and his cards were just better than mine. And I got him quite low multiple times and like just he stabilized in 4th Air Lingus me and I died. Or I believe in the last game I like all-in'd onto Comet and he just I played Chrome Mox, played my City of Traders and like was down to like 1 or 2 cards and he just like killed my Comet and I rolled get a spell back with nothing in my graveyard and then he just killed it. And then I also played against Scott in the final round, and that was the game the round that I think Steel Cutter showed up the most. Because Scott was playing like a blue-black mid-range deck with like Frog and Time Walk. And he I got him quite low, and then he had to deluge down to 4. But had to leave the Steel Cutter in play to do so. And I just played Voice of Victory and used the rarely thought of manual equipped Quarry Steel Cutter to my Voice of Victory to attack for 4. or no, I think I might have 5, but it was exactly his life total. And was able to pull it out because it was quite good. I ended up in that game like sandbagging a Chrome Mox just to get a Steel Cutter trigger the turn before. So that when I draw the second spell, I'm able to trigger the Steel Cutter. But yeah, I think overall the Roto draft in general, I think I maneuvered the draft fairly well. I do wish that Daniel got scared off, but at the same time, I think that Boros is deep enough that it's not the end of the world if we have 2 people drafting it.
Right. You guys both ended up with like really good looking decks, I think, which kind of just speaks to the depth of those 2 colors right now in the cube, because to be not even just like crossing over a bit, but to be just basically drafting the same deck and still both come out with like very functional versions of it, you know.
Yeah, I think it could have been a lot worse if we both try to draft like the same size deck, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like if he was fighting me for the
Right.
cheap threats, it could have ended up being worse. But like he took a lot more priority on cards like Palace Jailer and Pyrogoyf and like top end cards, Othari and stuff like that, where I was taking your 2 drops and your 1 drop efficient interaction stuff, which doesn't pair as well into his stuff. But yeah, I agree. I think Boros is very deep and very strong in the vintage queue right now. So I'm not upset with him getting out. I just wish he did, because my deck would have been even better.
So got out of the vintage queue, the vintage rotisserie at 2-1. So not in the 3-0 match, but still nothing to only 1, 2, 3 2-1s and a 3-0. So
what was Daniel's? He 1-2'd. Yeah, I was the only person that he beat, funnily enough, which is very interesting. But yeah, that draft went okay. At the end of it, I felt reasonable. I thought my deck had the chance to 3-0, but I kind of wanted to dodge Daniel, funnily enough. And as the result showed, like he was favored against me for sure. But I do think most of my other matchups were reasonable to good. And as the result showed, I 2-1. So was happy at this point with where I sat. Was very confident going into the artifact cube, because that is my cube. And not to say that I am like the best drafter at it or anything, but I think I'm obviously slightly favored in general because I built the thing and I know the interactions.
You're intricately aware of all of the good synergies and interactions because you put them there on purpose.
For sure. And the draft portion of this is honestly the most interesting, I think. So I'm going to spend most of the time talking about that. But so for those unaware, my cube is a artifact synergistic cube focused on various artifact themes and synergies, and I like to describe it as an engine building cube. It's really important to find little bits and pieces that work really well together to create unique interactions that move your engine, your vehicle a little bit closer to the end and getting a little bit more stronger turn by turn. So the other thing I want to mention about it is that my cube also, everyone starts with a copy of Cog Librarian in their pool. They do not need to spend a pick on it. They just start with it. So you have the ability to double pick your first pack if you want to. And there's 8 Cogworks moving around the draft all at once. So in this draft, I don't remember what else was in the pack. The only cards that I remember are the cards that I took, which were Refurbished Familiar, which quietly I think is one of the best cards in the cube. Just very, very efficient, aggressive if you need it to be, value, threat if you need it to be. And I also took Fable of the Mirror Breaker with my Cog Librarian, which, as you can see with the deck on screen, I did not play. My initial thought was to try and be some black-red sacrifice deck. with the Fable, because the Fable is obviously very powerful. However, that did not pan out because in my second pick, who Scott was passing to me at this point, I was past Imri, which I think is probably in the top 10 cards in the cube. So I wasn't going to pass it any further. So I took that and sort of set up into a blue-black, like, mid-range pile. I think I don't remember where everything came to me individually, aside from I know that in pack 3, Scott also passed me Simulacrum Synthesizer, which I wasn't building around at the time exactly, but is just generically very powerful and not super hard to build around. So I took it and was already sort of positioned at that point. I had the Refurbished Familiar. I believe I already had Sakari and Infiltrator, so I already had some pieces for it. I just needed to focus a little more on finding more 3s if I could. I had at that point already Waxen Shape Thief, which is a flash Praxia Metamorph for your stuff, but I did not end up playing that. It was like the last cut. It was that or like Blink, I think, were the two that I was trying to decide, and I needed more interactions, so I aired on the side of Blink. But I also was the entire draft thinking about the card Basim, because I think he is the best blue-black card in general. And he, just like Simulacrum Synthesizer, doesn't really take a ton to build around. So I was hoping to end up with him if he was opened, but I also know because he's quite powerful, it's entirely possible that someone else opened him and took him early if he was in the draft. However, as you can see, I ended up with the card because I got him 7th pick in pack 3, so almost the last possible chance. And I think that sort of tied my whole deck together. Overall, just a very strong mid-range value engine, a lot of individually powerful cards, not doing anything in particular that's super powerful, very synergistic, but every piece by itself is generically powerful and does work together favorably. So you end up with a pretty well-oiled machine. I think the Gear Hulk way outperformed. I think Infiltrator, which is one of my favorite cards, also was very good. Scroll of Isildur still just proves to be like one of the best blue cards every time it's played. I can't even sacrifice the cards very often in this deck, and it was still just an incredibly powerful card. I did get to take an Aether Spark at 5 and just immediately -5 it and draw 2 cards, which felt disgusting. And yeah, overall that was my thoughts on my deck. It was good. It was fun to play. I did end up stealing the feature match table from Pellman at this point. So yeah, we can get sort of into the individual rounds. Did you guys have any questions before I start talking about that? Or any thoughts?
No, keep going.
Okay. So round 1 of this, I played against Daniel again.
I do remember that being funny, but
yeah, his deck I think was okay. He was not super confident because he had not drafted this cube a ton and hasn't really figured out how to draft it. And obviously, since I do know how to draft the cube, was a little bit more favored in the matchup. He drafted an okay looking blue-white deck. He had some powerful stuff going on. I don't really remember exactly what happened in that matchup, but I did end up winning. Just outgrinded him. And then I played against Pellman. At this point was where I started taking over the feature match table. I played against Pellman, and his deck was very strong. He drafted a very good red-green treasure deck. in our game 1, he managed to assemble Parallel Lives plus Jolene, the Plunder Queen, and literally anything that made a treasure, as well as Hedron Detonator that deals your opponent a damage every time a treasure or a artifact enters. So in one turn, I remember him playing a creature, making a treasure, dealing me 4 because it was doubled twice, and then playing another thing, making another treasure, dealing me 4 again, and then playing Feasting Troll King, which makes 3 food, which was then doubled and dealing me 6 and just 14ing me in one turn, which was kind of hard to come back from. So I lost that game, and then I felt a little unconfident at this point, because that I just got completely pulverized.
Yeah, I also played against Pellman, and his deck was impressive. I mean, the kinds of stuff it did, kind of out of nowhere, just like it added up so fast.
And I remember, I don't remember exactly what happened in game 2, but in game 3, I believe game 2 was just a Sakari or a Simulacrum Synthesizer game. I just outgrinded him with that card. But in game 3, it was kind of interesting. We both got out to a good start in this game. However, I attacked with 2 Simulacrum Synthesizer tokens, 2 constructs, and he blocked with enough power to trade with him on turn 5, and I flashed in. This was probably the grossest play I made all weekend, honestly. I flashed in Sakarian Infiltrator squatted once, which the way Simulacrum Synthesizer is worded, it just needs any artifact that costs 3 or more to enter, and Sakarian Infiltrator, the token gets its mana value because it's a copy. So it at instant speed made 2 Sakarian Infiltrators that both triggered the synthesizer. So I made 2 10/10s and drew 2 cards and made 2 1/2s at instant speed, killing his 2 creatures because mine are now bigger than his. That felt really gross, but even with that, the game was still close. He had Hedron Detonator again, got me to 5. He also had I don't remember the name of the card, but it's a 4 mana green red card that lets you turn treasures into 1/1s at instant speed. So it was kind of hard to actually attack through him because all of his treasures are 1/1s. So even though I have like 4 constructs, he can just block it every turn. So I got really low, got to 5. I got him down to 1. And then I kind of had a brain fart for a second and made a play that was not good. There's some merits to it regardless, but I don't think it was correct. But at the time, I thought it killed him. That play was I had a total of 10 artifacts in play. One of which was a Nettle Cyst equipped to a Sakarian Infiltrator. So that creature is an 11/12. Everything else, the biggest thing I had was a 10/10. I cast the card Trellisara's Devastation, which gives all creatures in play -X for X number of artifacts I control. In my head, that meant all of my constructs die, but my Sakarian Infiltrator that's an 11/12 becomes a 1/2 again, and I can just attack him for 1 and kill him because he was at 1 life. That is not how that works. My Sakarian Infiltrator just died. All of my stuff just died. And then I had to grind back from no creatures in play with my opponent at 1. I was able to win that game, but it felt real awkward to make that play, especially as my first match on camera. And it just not actually work. But I also think that Trellisara's Devastation was very good. I do remember that it was very instrumental to me winning game 2 as well. I think it might have been in my sideboard. Maybe. I know I had it. I just don't remember where it was. It was probably in my sideboard, most likely. it was very instrumental against Pelman, in particular, because he was not expecting a sweeper. So being able to sweep the board out of nowhere when he like puts all his cards into play, as well as making a couple constructs or a couple power stones, was very, very instrumental against him. And yeah, that was the last round was pros. Who he had a pretty solid. You were Abzan, yeah?
Yeah, Abzan food.
A pretty solid Abzan food deck with a combo finish. He had Lannis, Genetic Expert plus cards. There's so many of them that combo with that thing.
Yeah, I think I had 2 different ways to do it, but
and you had the Soul Cleaver, and you had the 2/1 that gets counters.
Dissident, yeah.
Yeah. And I remember the first game, I believe I just killed everything. And the second game, I made a misplay, but it didn't end up mattering. I got an early Basim down and started triggering it, and I was keeping up
Metallic Rebuke
the whole game to try and protect my Basim, because I figured I could just like use that to win the game, just pressuring him because it becomes unblockable and gets bigger every turn. But then one turn I mistapped and accidentally tapped out of blue, and Pros was able to sneak through a removal spell onto it, and I had to grind back in from there. He was able to get pretty close to comboing me multiple times in the match, but I was able to stop it each time, and was able to pull that match out. I don't think anything else super impactful happened in that matchup. Am I forgetting anything, Pros?
No, not that I remember.
Okay. And yeah, I at this point, this was the end of day 1. I felt pretty good. I was tied with Pelman for first seed at this point. Both of us were
you were both 5-1 after the first day.
You were 5-1. And felt pretty good. I was a little unsure of how Merfolk Cube was going to go. I still feel and felt favored at the time in that cube in general, because I think my experience drafting and building the tribal cube kind of predisposes me to that sort of play style, as well as a lot of the people we're playing with don't have as extensive of old card knowledge, who don't know as many old cards and know which ones are like just blanketly powerful cards, like Legacy's Allure, or Sea Singer was another one, which is very powerful, and it reminds me of Old Man at the Sea, which used to be very, very good. So I felt fairly confident in that cube, but still a little unsure because it is a new cube, and in general I'm not the best at desert cubes. But I do think that I got together an okay deck. In hindsight, I still stand by this deck only being okay. I, not to spoil it, did do well with this deck. However, I think it was a combination of having good draws that lined up well against my opponents, as well as getting a couple of uniquely powerful cards and drawing them often. I mentioned after the draft to people that I think the correct way to draft this this cube as it stands is to find a couple of uniquely powerful cards like Legacy's Allure, Cryptic Coat. Obviously there's cards like Svelin or Thassa, stuff like that, and then try and curve out into those pieces to shut the door. So in this deck in particular, the thing that this deck was doing very well was having a lot of really tough to interact with mind control effects. I think I had Turn 2 Legacies Allure majority of the games that I played. That card is very, very powerful, and kind of just brick walls my opponent from even really playing anything, because like they're just they're giving me their best thing. That's just what's happening with that card. And I know a couple of times I had the curve of Legacy Allure to Sea Singer, and at that point I don't know what anyone's supposed to even do. Like it's just they can't ever have any creatures ever. And yeah, just I don't think anything too impactful happened in any of these matches. The one that was the most interesting was the one against Joey, or not Joey, it's Brian, sorry, in the finals. Brian drafted a pretty strong blue-red wizard merfolk deck, and had his couple of powerful top-end cards that I was mentioning were cards like Flame of Anor and Prismari Command, which line up very well against my threats being Cryptic Coat in particular. But we had a couple back and forth games. I was able to pull out the I'm not sure if I won the game where I took his guy that gives you merfolk when you counter spells or not. I think I might have lost that game, but I'm not positive. But the last game, I managed to win by sticking a coat and him not having one of his artifact destruction spells. He mentioned at the end that he had a Flame of Anor in his hand the whole time, but he never had a wizard that stuck in play for longer than a turn. Because I had my Legacies Allure, my Sea Singer and stuff. So he wasn't able to like get the value on it, so he never really cast it, and kind of just got beaten to death because I ended up with 5 mana and was never able to kill it because I always just had the ability to bounce it. The other matches weren't super interesting. I don't even remember a ton of them. I know Daniel had an okay looking blue-green deck, but again, he had slow draws and draws that were hampered by my mind controls and kind of just didn't really do too much. He did, funnily enough, I had Legacies Allure in play, and the creature that he played in that game was on turn 4 when he played a Hexproof 3/3. And that was the only creature he ever played. So he played that into Hadana's Climb, and I felt like I was just going to die. But luckily I was able to pressure him enough that it didn't matter. And then oh wait, Brian was actually Jeskai, I think. I think he also had Swords to Plowshares for, because I think he Swords to Plowshared my flyer multiple times, and it was really annoying.
Looks like he's got Swords to Plowshares, Radiant Destiny, and Noyandar, sorry.
I remember I made a couple attacks that proved to be bad because he had swords, but I wasn't playing around at the time because I didn't know he had it. And he like swords my 5 mana 3/3 flyer that gives all my guys. It made my guys not fly anymore, and then just killed my board. But overall, I mean, I was happy at this point with what I drafted and where I ended up. With this, I 3-0'd as well this draft, which meant that my final record going into the playoff bracket was 8-1. My only loss being the first round of the tournament. So I got 2 buys going in. So for me to make it, I just needed to win 2 matches to make the finals. Just basically normal 3-0, with the caveat of if I do that, I have winner's advantage in the finals, so I have to lose 2 matches. So it's kind of like I get better standing in the finals if I manage to just a normal 2-0, like a 3-0 8-man draft for me, basically. And I was pretty happy with this. I at the end of the draft didn't really think my deck was tremendous, but I think that actually was true for pretty much everyone in the draft. I think everyone sort of had an anemic draft, with the exception of Pros, funnily enough. I think Pros' deck was very good. But I think I I started off with Swords to Plowshares in the draft, and then took Borrow Wife early, and sort of settled into a black-white mid-range deck, which, funnily enough, earlier in the day, I was talking to, I think, Brian, and the card Zoraline came up, and we were talking about how I don't think Zoraline is very good in the cube. I think you pros were like, it's good in one specific deck, which was this deck.
Right.
And then
I made a comment about that to
drafted
somebody. Yeah, about how I did think that was funny because that was just like dinner the night before, right? That we had talked about that.
That was at Taco Bell for lunch.
Oh, at lunch, even better. Okay.
It was right before this draft. But I think I drafted a solid black-white mid-range deck. There were pieces that I wish I had, pieces that I ended up passing on. And I think the most interesting pick in the whole draft was my pack 3 pick 1. I opened Gleemox Time Walk. And up until I saw the Gleemox in the pack, which was the back card, I was thinking I was just going to end up splashing blue with no fixing at this point and try and find some fixing in the final pack. But I opened Gleemox and ended up passing the Time Walk to Daniel, and taking Gleemox over it, which obviously makes sense in my deck, but definitely got the side eye from Daniel when he opened a pack and had a Time Walk in it. But I think my deck had some powerful draws, but was very fair. So if I ran into anyone doing unfair things, the only real card that I had that interacted with it was Mind Twist. And other than that, I'm kind of just a fair creature deck. So if someone's like doing some like show and tell or sneak attack thing, I can't really interact with them very well. So I was really hoping to dodge that matchup. And funnily enough, no one really had decks like that aside from Pellman, because that's just how the draft broke, which I think was favorable for me. But I do still think my deck might have been better in the general environment. But as your average vintage cube deck, I don't think it was like particularly strong. It has some good cards for sure. It has cards like Ocelot Pride and like Swords to Plowshares and Barrogoyf or whatever, and Gleemox. But like in general, I don't think the strategy is particularly good. It's fine because white is just very powerful, but I sort of settled into it because it was open and it proved to be good enough. Not to get ahead of it, but I had a couple hours of sitting pondering because I had the buys and was a little I was lamenting my draft a little bit because I didn't really like where my deck was, but couldn't do anything about it. And then round 1, my round 1. Obviously there is no round 1 with this bracket structure, but my round 1, I played against pros. I stand by, I got lucky in that matchup. I think pros' deck was far and away better than mine. I think my deck operated on 2 axes. It either operated on the draw Ocelot Pride and protect it axis and just ram that through, or the Dark Confidant and Caustic Bronco grind you out axis. And I do not think the Dark Confidant Caustic Bronco axis is good against you. It's just slow and painful, and his deck was very aggressive. Plus, he had really good top end cards that were kind of a pain to deal with, like Athari, which he drew all 3 games. However, in game 2, I had my Ocelot Pride draw, which is going to beat anyone, regardless of their archetype, if they can't just kill me over top of it, or kill the Pride, which neither of those things happened. I forced it through and was able to just overwhelm him. And then game 3 was where I got pretty lucky. We got into a like sort of top deck war. I'm not sure if you were completely out of cards yet, pros, but I know I was. And I was notably on 6 mana exactly. And pros obviously around there too. I drew for my turn and drew the card Reprieve. Thinking, okay, we're kind of in a top deck war. Reprieve isn't the worst thing. It's like it'll slow him down, and then I'll get another card and hopefully find something to do. And Pros untaps and slams Athari. I reprieve it, and my 2 cards I draw, the one off reprieve and my draw step, were my 7th land and my sideboard Overlord of the Mistmoors. So exactly enough mana and the threat that would stabilize me that I sideboarded in. So I untap and slam that, and that just brick walls Athari. He just cannot attack anymore because he just immediately loses Athari and the 2/2, so it doesn't get him anywhere. Plus, even if he casts Athari, he can't really block my Overlord, and I just get more guys every turn. So that's exactly what happened. I played it. He played Athari. We sat there and stared at each other for a couple turns, in so much as I was attacking with my 6/6, and he wasn't able to do anything about it. And then eventually I just found a removal spell for Athari, and that was just the end of the game. I think drawing exactly those 2 cards on that turn, was very lucky. And I think if it broke in slightly different order, I just lost. And I was very happy to sneak out a win in that matchup because I do not think my deck deserved it. And then that sent Pros into the losers bracket, and me fighting Daniel, who I finished early in that matchup, so I was able to watch Daniel versus Pellman. And Daniel snuck out the win, but I think Pellman's deck again was more powerful. Daniel had a blue-black Time Walk Lutri deck with Frog, and topped out at the new Ugin, with no colorless spells to cast, just sort of the way that I think about it is the card Karn Liberated, like putting Karn in your mid-range decks because you top out and you just cast it and it sort of takes over the game. He wasn't able to like exile more things, but just being 7 mana, exile your best thing, and then just draw an extra card and gain 3 life every turn is very powerful in a mid-range deck, even if you can't trigger the exile effect again. So that he did that against Pellman a couple times, and one game I saw he Dak Fadened a Blightsteel Colossus that then immediately got ousted. Yeah, it immediately got ousted, but he then had a Dak Faden in play still, and was able to take a Retrofitter Foundry that was troublesome, and use that against Bellman. So he was able to sneak out that win. I fought him. I don't think, and he agreed with me at the end of this, that structurally his deck could ever be mine. He was just not set up to A, fight aggro decks at all, and B, fight my card advantage as well. He could not really answer creatures very well. So he, in our first game, got to 7, stuck the Karn, and then I just Phyrexian Revokered it, and then he couldn't kill it. So it just sat in play and made it so his card didn't matter until he died. He also Dak Fadened away my Aether Spark, and I was able to just kill it. Just attacked it down. And in the second game, I had the Dark Confidant draw and just like grinded him with card advantage. He agreed at the end of that match that structurally he cannot beat my deck. It's just not possible without getting lucky. So that sent Daniel into the losers bracket. At this point, both Pros and Daniel were sort of hanging out, waiting for Pellman to be ready. I think so. I was commentating at this point, and I mentioned that of the 3 people left standing, obviously the person I would prefer to fight in the finals is Daniel. So my hope was that Pellman would beat Pros, so that I don't have to fight Pros anymore. And then Daniel would beat Pellman again, because Daniel has proven that he can beat Pellman. I think my matchup against Pros is bad, and my matchup against Pellman is bad. Half of that happened. Pros did lose to Pellman, but Pellman crushed Daniel this time, which I think should have happened the first time. I think his deck is just stronger. He had a really strong Tinker flash blue-white control deck with like multiple sweepers and Teferi Time Reveler. But Pellman, like I said, beat Daniel, and then it was me facing Pellman, the one person I didn't want to fight in the finals. And I, going into the finals, did not feel favored, but I was still riding the high of, 8-1ing the regular portion, the Swiss portion, and then 3-0ing so far the finals, or 2-0ing the bracket.
Yeah, I was going to say essentially 10-1 at this point over.
Yeah, so
over
I felt good in my play, but not good in my matchup. And that sort of panned out in the first match. So this was the finals, and since I was the winner coming in and had not lost yet, Pellman had to beat me twice, 2 matches in a row. So the first match, I obviously in hindsight think I should have mulliganed both of my draws. I kept, like I mentioned, there were 2 axes that my deck functioned on: the Ocelot Pride on turn 1 axis and the Bob on turn 2 axis, and I had neither of those draws against Pellman. Kind of just tried to like nickel and dime answer his threats, which proved to not really be possible, because Oko in particular is just too hard to answer. And Teferi throws a wrench into that as well. I think in that matchup, I revokered Oko, and then he just killed my revoker and slammed Oko into play, and I just died. But I got just obliterated in the first 2 matches. It was not even close. So we reset, went to the second one, and at this point, I started feeling a little bit bad because I had one more match left to play, and I needed to win it, and I was just proven that I just get obliterated by Pellman's deck, and I kind of started to feel like I had gotten this far and was going to fall at the final hurdle. But I calmed myself, reset, and accepted that even if I lose, like, it's not the end of the world. Pellman would deserve it, obviously. And I, again, didn't think my deck was crazy good, so if I lose, like, it kind of makes sense. But game 1, I had the Ocelot Pride draw, and just crushed him, just overran him really fast, answered all of his things while Ocelot Pride and Grist cleaned up. And game 2, there was a really interesting decision that happened. Basically, what it came down to was Pellman had the ability to either tinker at sorcery speed or to 3 fairy and try and set up an instant speed tinker the following turn. He erred on the side of caution because he had already seen enough ways for me to answer a card like both Blightsteel cleanly with Shield Strategic or Swords, or his other threat, which was Triplicate Titan with the Swords to Plowshares. So, and I also have Containment Priest in my deck. So he tried to err on the side of caution and played Teferi. And his plan was play Teferi and defend it, so that he could untap and then on my next instep cast Tinker, bounce my blocker, and kill me with Blightsteel. Makes sense. However, in that game, after he made that play, he had notably an Aether Spellbomb in play, 1 mana up, and 2 cards in hand. This is my turn 3. So I play Mind Twist for 2, which is exactly his hand count, for the first time in the match. I do think Mind Twist was my best card against Pellman. I finally drew it. I played it on turn 3. He then was like, he audibly was like, I think this is going to decide the match. Or I think he said, this is the match right here. And he cracked his Spellbomb in response because that gives him a 1 in 3 chance to keep his Tinker. He loses 1 artifact, but like he's not going to win if he doesn't have this Tinker. So he cracks his Spellbomb, draws a card, and I hit his Tinker. And that sort of just ended the game right there. We continued to play on. There's more game to play, but realistically, coming back from that point with effectively no cards in hand, losing your real way to fight back against my board, was too much for him. And I was able to close it out. And
hooray!
Pros comes in running in with party poppers that don't all work. Confetti shooters.
Yeah, well, the plan with that was that I assumed that there would be more people left at the house, so I would have been able to send other people in there with them. But it was just me and Daniel doing double duty. So
it was fun. It was a good time. It was a good weekend. I was proud of my play, although I did make some misplays. That's just how it works. It happens. I had overall, I think my drafting in particular is very tight. I think my play, while good, I'm not saying it's not, did leave something to be desired in some aspects. In especially some of the like games that I played. But I think the overall like drafting, I don't think I made any egregious mistakes in my picks in any of the drafts, and it sort of panned out that way because obviously the draft is very important to your results. So yeah, I was very happy with the weekend, very pleased. Went home and got to show my girlfriend the champion playmat, and they just did not understand at first. There's like, oh nice, cool playmat. And I'm like, did you read it? Like, oh, you won. I'm like, yeah, I won.
Yeah, duh, I won. Of course I won. No, but all jokes aside, you have been a pretty dominant player for at least 2 or 3 seasons now. You've been close a few times. You ended day 1 at the top of the leaderboard. You didn't lose any more after that. It's a well-deserved win, and you're a great champion for the league.
I appreciate it. I did win or lose one more time though.
Yeah, just to build suspense though.
I know.
Just to build the narrative arc,
Had to take it maximum number of matches, right?
No, but well done.
Yeah, thanks. I have tried. I'm obviously going to continue to try. I play the game I enjoy playing, whatever, trying, but I have been trying specifically to win this tournament for a long time since we started it, because I have had a token picked out for myself for the entirety of since we had the opportunity to. Not gonna reveal it just yet to those who don't know. Obviously most people do, at least in the Cube group, but for those watching, I don't want to spoil anything. But I have wanted it for a long time, and having achieved it, it feels really good, but honestly mostly just feels like a weight's been lifted, because I have been putting pressure on myself for it, which I didn't need to do. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but I feel and have felt like I've been playing well and not having results that illustrated that. So finally having something that points to myself being like playing to how I feel like I should be playing, really is gratifying and makes me feel like I don't need to put as much pressure on myself going forward, which is good. Obviously very healthy. So yeah, very, very excited, very very happy with how I did and how it all panned out, and excited to get right back to it, because I have some updates I want to do to my cube. I know it's probably gonna be a minute to draft it until we draft it again, but I have some updates I want to do with Final Fantasy cards. Excited to draft our new cubes, and just excited to get back to it in general because I love cubing. So don't stop here.
Yeah, when are the next drafts?
All right.
Well,
thank you guys. Thank you, Matt, for joining. Congratulations again. And yeah, that's all we got.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.